Good morning, everyone. And first off, thank you for anyone who's a veteran that might be on the call today. So just want to highlight that this morning. And as Shelby said, my name is Christy Schaub. I'm with Schaub Solutions, and I also am a part-time HR business partner at my husband's company, doing something a little bit different, payroll and accounts receivables. Before COVID, I was working with an organization called Blue EQ and was traveling in the United States, picking up all kinds of frequent flyer miles and special travel perks. And I was traveling up into, I think it was about mid-March, and I worked with leaders from across a variety of different industries, all around emotional intelligence and how to create a psychologically safe place to work. And I'm just looking forward to the day when COVID will be behind us and we don't have to wear these things, and I can get back out on the road and do more education around what I think is a very important topic and a very important skill set. So just at a high level, psychological safety is the absence of interpersonal fear. So it's around people's comfort level in speaking up and speaking out. And it covers basically three basic human needs of belonging, fulfillment, and security. So when psychological safety exists, it can be very powerful. When it's absent, it can be dangerous. And one of the thought leaders around psychological safety is Amy Edmondson, and she's affiliated with Harvard. And she's got some great videos that you can access through Google, and one's a TED Talk, and she shares a couple of different examples of the power around psychological safety. And the one that I'll briefly share with you this morning, I think is good because it resonates across the board with individuals, because we've all needed at some point in our lives medical treatment or medical care. We've been in the hospital, etc. And the example that she shares is about a nurse who's working third shift at a hospital and sees, on the orders for the evening that she needs to prescribe a certain dosage of medication to a patient. And she looks at the order and she's like, I think this might be a little off, a little too high. I probably need to call the doctor and get clarity. And she looks to see the physician who ordered the medication, and she realizes that it's a doctor that she had called the week before in the middle of the night, again, to question some medication. And she also remembers that when she called him and started to, question the dosage, he berated her, he belittled her. So at that moment in time, she had a decision to make. Do I call and get clarity, or do I just assume what he's written down is correct? And, in the video, Amy not only shares that example, she shares aviation examples, senior leadership team examples, etc. So I think that just gets at the power of psychological safety in the workplace. Now, currently, I think we're 9 months into this pandemic, and I think there's been lots of focus across organizations to keep employees physically safe. I know at my husband's place of business, we take temperatures every day. We've got, cleaning log sheets where we go around throughout the day cleaning. We're constantly checking in with the employees to make sure that they're okay. And so I'm sure you guys at your place of businesses have done some things similar. So again, that physical safety is important, but I don't want to lose sight of the importance of the mental and emotional health. And so I'm just curious, as you think about your workplaces today, just curious how COVID-19 has impacted the employee experience at your place of business. And I got a couple of examples here of how, I've been impacted using Zoom to do training. You probably have employees who are trying to work remote that have kids at home. I think today in Troy, you're all remote because of some busing challenges. Temperature taking, PPE, face mask. Maybe some of you had some layoffs or furloughs. So I'd be just curious if you want to use the chat and just maybe share What's been the impact as far as employee experience at your place of business? We'll see if anything comes through here. Shelby can read them off. And there may be so much that you just don't want to put it in the chat room. There's been some interesting studies that have come out just within the last couple of months. McKinsey's done some research, and they've reached out to employees at a wide variety of businesses. And they found that about 80% of employees have been materially impacted or affected by COVID. And you may have some employees that are thriving through all of this. You may have some employees that, wow, they like that freedom and flexibility if they've got the luxury to work from home. You may have some employees struggling at the moment. Just saw an article yesterday, I think in the New York Times, just about the levels of burnout and anxiety, just with everything that's going on at work, at home, and in the communities. So Shelby, did anybody offer any?
Yep. So furloughs,
okay,
and then new expectations on social distancing.
Yeah, and that can be a challenge. I know at my husband's company, very small company, he put signage up, you know, do not enter, don't come in here. We've stopped the carry-ins, the sharing of things. So it's definitely had an impact. And with the furloughs, you still have the people that are still working, that again, those furloughs can impact them as well with additional work and just the fear of loss. So I think, again, that's one of the reasons why emotional intelligence and psychological safety is, it was important before COVID, but I think it's even more relevant just with the things going on around us. And so a little bit more in-depth definition of what psychological safety is, and it's all around a climate in which people feel comfortable expressing themselves and being themselves. And so it's a condition or an environment in which people feel that they're included, that it's safe to learn, it's safe to contribute, it's safe to challenge the status quo, basically to speak up and to speak out, without the fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished in some way. And the power with psychological safety is that every person in your organization creates what we refer to as a psychological safety zone. So, and it's all based on our level of emotional intelligence. And so just very briefly, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of emotional intelligence, or EQ, but this is the definition that we use at Blue EQ to define or to describe emotional intelligence. And I think no matter what definition you look at, every definition is going to have an element of awareness. And so with this description, we have two levels of awareness. We have internal awareness, as far as how aware are we of our own emotions, and then how aware are we of others' emotions, and how skilled are we at reading and picking up on body language. So those are the two elements of awareness. Internally, we also have to look at our ability to control our emotions. So you could be on a call, on a Zoom meeting, and someone's just, you know, going on and on and on and on. And you think to yourself, boy, I could just about strangle them at this moment. It's that ability to self-control and kind of maybe sit back, take a deep breath, and think, you know, that wouldn't be a good career move, right? So that's the importance of that self-control. And then externally, it's your ability to influence others and help them manage their emotional intelligence. And then around those four dimensions, you have what we call self-regard, or the belief in yourself. So people that have higher self-regard interact with others differently than people that have low self-regard. And I wanted to bring this definition out because really, again, psychological safety is all based on one's level of emotional intelligence. So if you want to create psychological safety within your teams, within your organizations, the first place to start is to look at people's levels or skill sets of emotional intelligence. And the research that Blue EQ highlights in their training, again, shows that when somebody has low levels of emotional intelligence, they're going to create low psychological safety within their teams, within their work environments. That's going to lead those individuals to do certain kinds of behaviors. And those behaviors are going to lead to certain types of business results. So I'm sure everyone on the call today has probably worked for an individual that might have that lower level of EQ. And probably it wasn't the best boss that you've ever had in your life, right? So if you think about somebody that you've worked with in the past who wasn't a good listener, maybe wasn't approachable, made demeaning comments, etc., think about the work environment that you were in. What might be some behaviors that were demonstrated or exhibited? And if you had the fortunate opportunities never to have had that bad boss, maybe just kind of think about if you've worked with someone who maybe, lied about things, wasn't trustworthy, not a good listener, and that's how they treated you. What might be some behaviors you might exhibit? And so if you want to use the chat box, just let's capture some of those behaviors. Anything coming through, Shelby?
I don't have anything right now.
Just yet? Okay. So when people exhibit behaviors because of low psychological safety, a lot of those behaviors tend to be around self-preservation, risk management, and pain avoidance. And just to give you an example, many years ago, I worked for a gentleman who his nickname was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So when he was in a good mood, great boss, great to be around, but when he was in a bad mood, nobody wanted to be around him. And it was kind of funny, whoever was the first person in the office in the morning who interacted with him, we'd go to that person, hey, what's his mood today? Just to kind of gauge. We use that, what's the weather like today? Because if he was in a good mood, we felt comfortable approaching him with different questions or concerns. If he was in a bad mood, we stayed clear. And so again, these are just some of the areas, some of the behaviors that could be a result of low psychological safety. And when people exhibit these types of behaviors, maybe afraid to take moderate risk, they're keeping their heads buried, they're just trying to preserve themselves and their jobs. What we tend to see as far as a business result is higher turnover, less engagement. And unfortunately, what a lot of the studies have shown, some of this can also be somewhat generational, in that the people who are working in areas of low psychological safety who leave an organization tend to be some of your younger employees. So that Gen Z and those millennials, maybe the people that don't have as much time invested in a company. So if you're working hard to recruit and retain the younger generation, this is definitely something to look at as far as the level of psychological safety in the workplace. There was an interesting study done a few years ago with some researchers from Harvard, and they looked at companies over a 12-year period to take a look at psychological safety. I think some of the study might have been about bullying in the workplace. And here's some of the data points that they found. When people do not feel psychologically safe, here's some of the things that can happen in the workplace. And I'll give you just a second to kind of look through some of these statistics. But the one piece that really stuck out for me the first time I saw this data was the word intentional. And I think that really gets at the fact people are making choices in how they engage. And so if people are not feeling psychologically safe, they're going to decrease their work effort. They may decrease their time spent at work, the quality of their work. One of the other items that, I kind of or not surprised, I should say, is that people are not feeling psychologically safe and they're working around people that, don't do well in managing their emotions, might be having a bad day. 25% of people admitted that they take their frustrations out on their customers. So again, for organizations that are looking at customer focus, their customer brand, psychological safety can definitely have an impact. And this research came from an article called The Price of Incivility, and I think you can access this for free online. So again, The Price of Incivility, and I think it was back in 2012, 2013. So on the flip side, we just talked briefly about low emotional intelligence. If someone has high levels of EQ, they're going to create an environment where there's higher psychological safety. And in those climates, people are going to exhibit different sets of behaviors. And then you're going to have a different set of business results. And so some of the behaviors that we tend to see where people feel safe is people go, above and beyond the expectations. They give it their career best, their discretionary effort, their peak engagement. At the same company where I worked for the Jekyll and Hyde, I also worked on a special project with the VP of Talent Management at the time. And everybody just loved her to death. I mean, she was so approachable. She listened to everybody's ideas. She was grateful for all the work we put in. And I will tell you, this team bent over backwards to work so hard because we wanted to make her look good. We just wanted to do our best for her. And she was just an awesome, awesome boss. And Google also has been looking for what makes that perfect team. And so there's some other interesting research you can Google about Google's quest for the perfect team. And they were wondering, why do we have some teams at our company that excel, go above and beyond expectations, and why do we have some other teams that just, kind of miss? And most of the time when teams are not successful, it doesn't have anything to do with their technical skills or their IQ. It comes down usually to their level of emotional intelligence, and then ultimately to the level of trust and respect that they have for their teammates. So Google spent about 2 years and analyzed 180 different teams within Google to look at different factors. So they looked at team dynamics, they looked at length of time at Google or within a particular position. They looked at location. Do these more successful teams, are they co-located? Are they all within the same region, etc.? They looked at technical skill sets. They also looked at personality traits. So I'm sure they've done some work with DISC or Myers-Briggs. The researchers at Google also looked at research over the last few decades on teams and collaborations, just to see if they could glean anything from all of the research that's been done to date. What Google found out from all of this research is the #1 driver of team success is psychological safety. So when team members feel that it's safe to take risks and to be vulnerable in front of each other, that's what makes the teams the most successful. Now, there's some other elements highlighted here, like dependability, structure and clarity. Do they know what their purpose is? Do people have the clear roles, etc.? Those other things are important as well, but if the psychological safety wasn't in existence, the teams just didn't do as well. Now, you can find this information on Google, and I've got this highlighted in an attachment Shelby's going to send out here in just a few minutes. But if you look at the bottom of the slide here where it says regarding work, if you Google that, you can find their research study. But I think even more important and more practically, Google has put together some great training resources that they're using that I think would be awesome for new leaders or team leaders, supervisors. And I think it's a 2-day program, and Google offers for free on their website the PowerPoint slides, the speaker notes, all of the activities. And in the training, they spend a little bit of time about emotional intelligence, and then spend some time on psychological safety, and then really look at some other, what they consider important skills that leaders need to have. So again, it's a great free resource if you're, working on a tight training budget and you need to develop and teach things yourselves internally. Check it out on Google, and that's again the regarding work. So we've talked about the power of psychological safety in the workplace and why it's so important. We've also highlighted what some of the costs are if people do not feel psychologically safe. And some people sometimes think, well, this psychological safety, it's all just kind of fluff. It's all the soft skills. We've got a business to run. We've got goals we need to meet, budgets we need to meet. Psychological safety isn't all about sitting out by the campfire, singing Kumbaya, and eating s'mores. You also have to have high standards. You also have to hold people accountable. And I really like this matrix from Amy Edmondson's book, The Fearless Organization. I think this book came out maybe a year or two ago. And so if this is a topic of interest to you, that you want to look at how do we have psychological safety throughout our organizations, highly recommend her book, and you can pull this graphic from there. But this really gets at the point that it's important that you have both dimensions. You've got psychological safety as well as performance standards. And what we see in some companies, they may have low standards but high psychological safety. That'd be a fun place to work, right? I'm engaged, I'm enjoying life because I'm not held accountable for stuff. And she refers to that as the comfort zone. If you have low standards, but low psychological safety, people may just be apathetic, probably see lots of turnover, lack of engagement. On the far bottom right, high standards, low psychological safety. Unfortunately, I think this is where a lot of organizations are, and probably even more today, just with everything going on. But this is where you've got that extreme burnout and anxiety. People are being held to high standards, but they're just not feeling very safe. So the sweet spot, the goal where we want to be is high standards, high psychological safety. And that's where we have a learning organization, we've got high performance. So again, really like the chart here from her. And it's not easy to get in that upper right-hand quadrant. It takes work, but that's the beauty of emotional intelligence. It's something that we can learn and develop. So how do you get psychological safety on your teams or in your workplace? And again, it starts with developing your emotional intelligence skills. And there's a lot of different books, training programs that you can take a look at. When I worked for Goodrich many, many years ago, we were using the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And, $20, I think you can buy the book, take a little self-assessment, and, kind of look at different ways that you can improve your EQ based on the guidance in the book. So that was one very, very cost-effective way. I believe UD, through their Center for Leadership, offers some training programs. And of course, I have to say, Blue EQ does some great programs as well. And with the pandemic, they've moved away, of course, from face-to-face training, and they're doing half-day virtual seminars. And I think they do those 3 or 4 times a month. And so I'll be sharing their website here at the conclusion, but they'd be another great resource for some training. But if we look a little bit more tactically, as far as, what can a team leader, supervisor do to create psychological safety? One is to demonstrate engagement. And, here's a couple examples for that. When you're in meetings, be present and be focused on the conversation. Close that laptop, put your phone on vibrate, be engaged, show that you're engaged, right? Another suggestion here is ask questions with the intention of learning from your team. So this demonstrates humility, it demonstrates curiosity, and who knows, you might learn something, right, from some other team members. So one great EQ skill is learning how to ask questions, but you also need to be careful how you ask questions. So if you look at the next bullet point around showing understanding, and avoid placing blame, again, you need to ask some questions to understand why, but think about the way you ask the question, because if you ask a question where somebody feels like they're being blamed, like, why did you do it like this? They may start to get defensive, and you don't want that because that just leads to potential conflict. So think about how you ask questions where you're focusing on solutions. How can we work toward making sure this goes more smoothly the next time? Help me to understand. So again, think about the questions that you ask and how you ask questions. And while you're doing that, also, be cognizant of your facial expressions. And that's something that I've worked on through the years, was maybe having a little bit better of a poker face. I'd have employees come to me with what they thought was a great idea. And in my mind, I'm thinking, that's kind of a stupid idea. I'm thinking that to myself, didn't say that, but they could tell by the look on my face, I thought it was a stupid idea. So be cognizant of your facial expressions. If you've never videotaped yourself talking in front of a group or leading a meeting, think about maybe videotaping yourself just so you can kind of see some of your natural expressions. And I think it's even more important in our current environment that, leaders ask people how they're doing, how they're feeling, especially if you've got employees who are working remote now, that you're not seeing them every day. Think about some different touch points or ways that you can connect with them. And maybe instead of going straight for the agenda that you need to cover, ask people how they're doing. And some leaders may need a little bit of training or coaching on how to come across as caring or interested or empathetic. But again, showing understanding can go a long way to foster that psychological safety. Some other ideas here is to be inclusive in interpersonal settings. So learn how to express gratitude for contributions within your teams. And this is something too that I've had to learn through the years, is to say thank you, but to also say thank you where I was specific and it was timely, and my body language demonstrated that thanks as well. So again, I think it's important in these times of stress and anxiety that we're in, that maybe you go above and beyond to give some more kudos out to people. Another way to drive inclusiveness within your teams is to talk about your personal work preferences and work styles and encourage other people to do the same. When I was at Goodrich and then also at Dayton Children's, we did a process called a new leader assimilation. And it was something where we, send a couple of questions to the new leader, to ask them about their work style, their preferences, what are some of the goals that they envision for the department. And we'd have employees put together some questions they had for the new leader, and also share kind of how they like to work together as a team. You bring them together, HR could facilitate it, or another leader could facilitate it. And it was a great way to start to build some dialogue and trust all around styles and preferences, and just getting people to connect and get things out in the open. So again, if anybody's interested in learning more about that process and how we did that, just send me an email and I'll be happy to share you the standard work or the guidance for that. On being inclusive in decision making. Now I realize, in a lot of cases, depending on the type of decision that needs to be made, you can't take the time to go out and ask, every employee their thoughts and opinions and feedback. But in a lot of cases you can. And so one way to build psychological safety is to ask people for input. And I'm sure most of your organizations do engagement surveys, etc. I know a lot of places are doing more frequent surveys, pulse surveys, etc. So again, be sure that you're getting some input. And if you now have some employees remote, you've got some hybrid teams and you're having to look at new ways for meetings and how you communicate, check in with your people to see how things are going, what's working, what isn't working as far as that meeting structure. Another suggestion here is to not interrupt or allow interruptions. People might feel like you don't care about their ideas or suggestions. Again, that's another skill I've been working on through the years. I would be in meetings and I would get so excited about the topic at hand, and I would have that great idea. And instead of waiting for silence or the opportunity to speak, I would interrupt and throw out that great idea. And I think I tried to rationalize that behavior, that if I just didn't say it in the moment, I'd forget. And so one of my strategies was to start writing those great ideas down. So I'd always have a piece of paper and something to write with, and I'd write down that idea. And then when there was some silence, was it still a great idea that I even wanted to suggest? But that was just a way to manage that for myself. But again, as a team leader, you kind of have some ownership there in your team meetings to make sure that people are being heard, and try to manage those interruptions the best that you can. And then a couple of other ideas here is to show confidence and conviction without appearing inflexible. So it goes back to managing the team discussions. I think it's probably challenging for a lot of people right now. Again, if you've got some hybrid teams and you have some people on Zoom or some other meeting technology tool, and you have some people in the office together, those can get really challenging. I know when we would do that in the past, the people that were all together, I'm sure stay socially distanced, but if they're all in a meeting room together and you've got some others on the phone, a lot of times the people on the phone might feel left out. So be thinking again about that meeting structure and manage those sidebar conversations. Really work to ensure that people don't think conflict is personal. Work towards those win-win solutions. The last item here is about managing or modeling vulnerability. So again, share your perspective on work and failures with your teammates. And one great suggestion for this is anytime you wrap up some big project or initiative, take the time to do some reflection around what worked, what didn't, what did you learn about the experience, and have your team members do the same thing and then have some conversation around it. So I think the more we can be vulnerable as leaders and be willing to admit mistakes and share concerns, other employees may model that behavior. And so a woman who's got some great work around vulnerability is Brene Brown. So you can Google her TED Talks, and she's got some great training, and I think her most recent book was Dare to Lead. The last item up here I have is around measuring psychological safety, and a couple of suggestions here. First and foremost is consider asking people for feedback on different elements of emotional intelligence. So ask them, ask your boss, ask your direct reports, some colleagues, but get some feedback if you've never had feedback on some of these things before. You can consider doing some self-assessments, either around emotional intelligence, or I'm going to have Shelby place in the chat box this little self-assessment that I found online that you can do, and just to kind of gauge maybe how much psychological safety might be within your team. But there's tons of different self-assessments for emotional intelligence. The EQ 2.0 book's another one. But get some feedback, maybe do some self-assessments, and then you may want to consider at some point a team or organizational assessment. And the example that I have posted here is actually from Blue EQ, and they have a team assessment called the PS16, where it looks at what they call the 4 quadrants of psychological safety. So the learner safety, the challenger, collaborator, and inclusion. And this can be something that could be done in addition to your engagement surveys, or maybe you take a quarter off from the engagement surveys and look at something solely focused on psychological safety. So you can find out more information about the PS16 on the Blue EQ website. Now, I just want to highlight a lot of the ideas that I just had on these last couple of slides came from the rework with google.com. It came from that same site where some of the trainings posted. So a lot of great ideas there that you can download and share with your teams. So I want to highlight some of the resources, and with the document that Shelby's posted on the back side of the assessment, I've listed some other resources if you want to do a deeper dive on psychological safety. So again, I have to give kudos and a call out to Blue EQ. And so they've got their training, they've got assessments, some really great assessments as well, and their EQ assessment is tied into their workshop that they do, or you can take it standalone. I've got the link to the Google site, Amy Edmondson's book, and if you're not a big reader, you know, definitely check out her TED Talk on psychological safety. The little self-assessment that Shelby posted came from No Hard Feelings. And then a couple of articles that I think are really great articles with some really great tips and tactics on how to create psychological safety is from Harvard around high-performing teams need psychological safety, how to create it. And then the last article I just found last week, and I think it may be quite relevant if you're doing the virtual meetings, Zoom, etc. And this is another article on Harvard from Amy Edmondson on how to foster psychological safety in virtual meetings. And with any of those Harvard articles, I think you can get 5 a month for free, I think. So anyway, just some resources that you may want to check out. And then I'm also happy to answer questions or provide you with any of those resources, more information on any of those resources. There's my contact information, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I also have a website that highlights some of this. So I want to thank you. I don't know if there's any questions that have come through. I know I'm about the end of my time here.